Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by Tucker, Carmouth, Hazel, and we're here today to review Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Before we do, if you want to talk to us about Kirby, make sure to join our Discord link as usual, top of the description below down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. Gaming content's gonna come back. I'm in the midst of the week from hell, so it kind of got fucked up again. But starting next week, it'll be back. And Tucker, let's hold ourselves accountable.
Uh-oh, that's never a good sign.
BLB will be back next week too.
Yes!
Fucking go! But Tucker, we're not here to talk about that. We'll talk about that when it's time. But right now it's time for something different, and it is time to show off these amiibo that I bought.
Oh, look at
that!
That's
about Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
That's what this presumably 30 to 40 minute video is. It's just gonna be him showing his amiibo the entire time.
Yes. But Tucker, Forgotten Land is here. We have both beaten it. Oh, yeah. I have regrettably not gotten to do basically any of the post-game content yet because I've been buried under a mountain of shit. Yeah. But I finished the game. You finished the game.
I did.
You are the Kirby critic in the room as usual.
I am. Yeah.
And so I want to begin with your thoughts on this brand new Kirby game.
On this brand new Kirby game that I reacted to very heavily when it was initially revealed, because in my mind, even as someone who was never a Kirby fan in terms of experience, I never played too many Kirby games, but since my opinion on Kirby has waned significantly as I've actually played his games, but I always thought the idea of a 3D Kirby game would be perfect. Copy abilities, exploration, using Kirby's floating moveset in something that was a little more robust in terms of scope, and guess what? That's what we got. Let me check my watch, like 25 years late than it should have come out, but the fact that we finally allowed, or how this finally allowed Kirby to take a step in a fresher direction for the first time in over a decade, or at least since we've been cognizant of Kirby games releasing, it's very exciting, and I am coming in with the thesis that I personally believe, at least from what I have experienced, this is the best Kirby game from a design standpoint, from a content perspective, and that's where I'm going with my own thoughts.
Yeah, I'm largely on the same page as you. This is not my favorite Kirby game. This for me actually is a Metroid Dread type situation.
Okay,
it's
which is a good thing.
Yes, which is a great thing. If people aren't familiar, Metroid Dread is one of my top favorite Switch games. Yeah, and this is Forgotten Land's another one of those for me. But the reason I draw this analogy is it was a hotly anticipated Nintendo game that for me completely lived up to my expectations, but is probably my second favorite in its series. For Metroid, my first favorite is Fusion.
Oh, okay.
For Kirby and the Forgotten Land, this is my second favorite. I think my first favorite is always going to be Superstar Ultra. Yeah. And if you want to hear us hotly debate that point, Mr. Superstar hater over there, check out the Great Kirby Debate. I still think one of our best videos. But no, I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land, while I don't think it's going to dethrone my number one, it's just a lovely game. I really think that in the modern Kirby style was getting so tired. Yes. The entire franchise was getting tired, but I think by the time, even though Robobot is great, it kind of felt like a blip in this just like Return to Dreamland to Star Allies malaise.
Yeah. Which also included a lot of spin-offs that were in the exact same style. So when you're talking about Battle Royale and Kirby Fighters 2 and all these fucking eShop games, they all looked just about the same. So even if there weren't that many mainline games coming out, it was still just a hodgepodge of homogenous Kirby.
I think
homogenous hodgepodge.
And the reason I bring this up is because I think that in broad strokes, this game gets away from that. But if I had to criticize the game anywhere as I want to get into, I think it still does feel a little like it's losing a little bit of the personality of the older Kirby games.
Sure, okay.
Whether that's in terms of like level motif or like, I love Waddle Dee Town, but the Waddle Dees are just like wearing hats, and that's what differentiates them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
I think this is an amazing foundation and one of the most playable, enjoyable, high scope, high fidelity, exciting Kirby games ever. But I'm excited for the Robobot sequel, which takes these tenets and this great gameplay and puts a little bit more of, I think, a unique spin on top of it.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're going into discussing here is not the Mario Sunshine or Mario Galaxy of 3D Kirby's. This is the Mario 64 of 3D Kirby's.
That's a great analogy.
Because it's the first one. And, as someone who's played almost all the 3D Marios, I like 64 quite a bit, but it certainly does lack a little bit of spark because it was the building block. It was the first foray into 3D. What makes this game unique is not that it has all sorts of crazy gimmicks and stuff, which of course it does. Mouth fluid, as I think we'll get into, is a huge boon in terms of creativity to this game. But this is the 3D Kirby game. It's the first time officially a platforming 3D Kirby game has been released to this scope. I actually just played Blast the other day, which is not a very good game. But
that's fine.
But having that be our experience with 3D Kirby before this makes this game leagues better in comparison. Obviously, it's a way better game from every single possible metric. But I'm excited to see where this goes next as well. Yeah. Assuming that HAL has the chutzpah to make 3D Kirby its own continuing series, and maybe we have 2D Kirby and 3D Kirby is releasing intermittently, that kind of stuff. But yes, I'm excited to see what comes next, but I also don't think that this game is necessarily lacking in its own identity, because I think it does have so many of its own ideas that are why, in terms of game design philosophy and content, I think this game is so strong. One of my favorite stretch games, easily my favorite Kirby game. One of the best modern 3D platformers, all those metrics.
Yeah, and I should clarify again, it's my second favorite. I'm sort of, what I'm looking for is more, not that what here is that wrong. I suppose we ought to start with the actual nuts and bolts of this being a 3D platformer now, which is, I think, the only place where I would knock the sort of personality of the game a little bit, because I do think that many of these levels start to run together within the context of their worlds, which does make sense, because it's a stage-based game, but it very much feels interconnected, because the stages feel like they just run into each other. Yeah. Which I think is both to its benefit and its detriment.
Sure. No, I definitely agree with that. I think that maybe where I draw the line in terms of a more positive direction on that is I like that they are very consistently themed within the worlds. And in terms of gameplay mechanics, but within each of the levels, within each of the worlds, comparatively, there is always something that makes them stand out. I think in terms of aesthetics and background and stuff, maybe there are 2 or 3 out of the 5 or 6 per world that you can say, okay, well, why aren't these just stitched together? But also, that's a problem that a lot of platformers have, a lot of 3D platformers have. You know, everything in the new Super Mario Bros. Games could just be one long level. Some of the 3D world levels, you know, Super Bell Hill and fucking Rolling Bell Hill, whatever, those could be one level.
It's a donkey joke,
Yeah, I just came up with it on my own, inspired by Video Game Donkey. But I don't necessarily think that I ever found myself thinking, oh, this just feels homogenous, because the worlds are relatively short. It's 5 levels. The levels are, I think, perfectly lengthed within each of the levels. I always feel like I've reached the climax of this level's gimmick. I've explored this enough. I'm ready to move on to something new. And then what's next is the same in terms of aesthetic and continuing the theme, but different enough to where I'm excited to see what's around the next corner.
No, I agree with you. I just, like, the way I think about it is I think of the I believe World 3 is a carnival world, and I love the carnival world. But what's really fun is at one point you go into like the haunted house segment, and that's so it's a carnival, but it's a different take on the carnival, and that feels cool. Opposed to, like, in World 1, it's like, here's the first level, then we're going into the tunnel, and the tunnel is the next level. That sort of continuity, I think, could have been a little bit more done there to make every level feel distinct. But nonetheless, it's hard to care about that until you're done playing the game and you're thinking back on it, because in the moment, this game does a fantastic job of forcing you to really engage with the environment, which I want you to talk about, because this is perhaps your biggest point against something like Superstar.
Yeah, and my greatest point against not only Superstar, but I think the Kirby franchise as a whole, again, what I've experienced of it, sans not Woolly World, fucking Epic Yarn. Yeah. Excluding Epic Yarn, which is not designed by HAL and does have a lot more environmental engagement in terms of diversity and stuff like that. I think the Kirby series has always had a problem, at least for me, in terms of making me as a player engage with specific level elements in a particular way. Enemy placement, platform placement in these games, like Nightmare in Dreamland, like Kirby's Adventure, like Superstar Ultra, these games don't necessarily feel like they have deliberate placement of their level elements to where I don't feel like I need to engage with them in order to enjoy the game experience. Now, what Forgotten Land does so differently is create crafted encounters. Okay, you see big spiky guy and 2 rangers. Okay, you need to engage with them in this specific way. There's this guy with this power-up over here, and if you know, it's the ice power-up, then you can freeze the rangers and shoot them into the thing. Like, there is crafted elements of, I know how the developer wants me to engage with this, and the placement of it facilitates that, especially within the exploration of these levels, which are incentivized not only by meaningful collectibles that impact progression, as I certainly want to get into, because I think that's this game's greatest strength, but in terms of, I want to engage with these levels, because if I miss something, I'll have to play the level again, which is not, a terrible thing, but I want to see if I can get everything on a first try.
Yeah, and I think that they make, a lot of the times I was coming either close to 100% or 100% of the levels as I went. And on one hand, I thought maybe they're making it a little bit too easy to get some of these side challenges. And I think there's an argument there. The entire game is very easy. I only died one. I put on wild mode. I only died one time in the final fucking crazy boss. Which I'm excited to talk about that sequence. But on the whole, I didn't really care that I was basically finding everything on the first try, because as you're saying, they really force you to engage with the levels as you're in them. Yeah, and that's to the better, even if it means that, I don't have to replay this level 3 times to find everything. I just have to go back through once for that one waddle-dee that I didn't collect.
Yeah, and that's kind of how my exploration philosophy mostly works for collectible style games. Is I want to go nook and cranny and try to get everything, which is why I reached 100 or 90% completion on each level, because my first try is because I was taking my time. I was going as slowly as possible, checking every possible thing. And what I do think is to the benefit of this game is that it does feel natural to want to explore and to see, there's this rock that's sort of experiencing something. So if I go behind there, maybe there's a little secret area with a pile of coins or a waddle-dee or whatever. But is that there are still things in these levels that even though I was paying super duper attention, I missed. And I think the quote-unquote achievements, the unlocking of the waddle-dees, the little missions that you have per level, are very well designed in terms of variety within each level. There's only a few kinds of mission types within the levels that repeat across the games. Like 2 or 3 times you'll have to knock the wanted posters off the walls, which just it boils down to you paying attention to the environment, make sure you notice them. But even when I'm, hard thinking of, I need to find these fucking posters, I'll miss one. And I'll be like, damn, that one must have been really well hidden. I'm interested to go through the level and not have to worry about anything else, but really just pay attention to that. I think the way that they're paced out and spread out across the levels is incredibly engaging, especially in the way that they unlock. Is you don't know what they are until you've gone through the level. They tell you what they are if you've engaged with an aspect of that mission. But if you have not, it will not tell you what it is, except for when you beat the level, it'll give you just one. If there's 2 or 3 that you still haven't gotten, it'll only give you 1. And I think there's a really nice pacing there of, okay, we want to tease you to pull you back in to make you want to, I realize I missed that. I remember where that thing is. I can go destroy that now, or interact with that element in a different way, or be this boss in a different way. But it's not like giving you everything. It's a nice drip feed that I think this game's gameplay cycle is really based off of.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about that sort of meta game of getting the waddle-dees to clear to build out the town and everything. But before that, there's a really interesting choice that they make in this game that I wasn't sure how they'd handle, which is Kirby's floating. Yeah. Because going into the game, my question was, we want to incentivize the players to explore and to be more deliberate as they're going through the levels. Do we do that by giving these stages a ton of verticality, so you need to be floating up and about looking for like hidden platforms and everything? Mm-hmm. Or do you do what this game does and limit Kirby's mobility? And they choose the latter.
They limit his mobility by, I think, essentially chaining how high he can go above the ground that you're above.
Yeah, and it's contextual. Like, there's not one continual skybox.
Yes, yeah.
It's based on what the challenge is in the area that you're in, is how high you can float. And I think actually, while at first it's like, but floating is such an important part of Kirby's gameplay. Yeah. This, I think, really made me question whether that's even true. Yes. Because I think not stapling him to the ground, but keeping him tethered within a sort of variable distance does force you to think about what's around the corner, or think about, okay, so I'm in the desert area and there's a waddle-dee up here like in a cage, but I can't just float high enough to reach up to him.
How do I get there?
Yeah, I got to go look, and I got to figure out what the way forward is. And usually the way forward is not that hidden, but it's at least forcing you to think more than head empty, hit A, get up to the cage.
Yeah, and especially because with this tethering, And the fact that there aren't, hidden platforms that you have to float up to get in the sky that you can't get to or can't notice unless you're flying. Like, there's not things that force you to float. You actually almost never have to mash A to float Kirby around in this level, which I think for me increased engagement because it meant that I wasn't thinking about floating almost ever, and I was tethered to the ground thinking about the combat, the enemy placement, the level design, the layouts, in a way that I wasn't incentivized to necessarily in previous Kirby games, where I see, okay, we're on the beach level, and there are little platforms over the water, but if I fall through the platforms, I'm gonna die in the water, and there's a Waddle-Dee here, there's a whatever. I can interact with this stuff, or I can float above it in a way that doesn't hamper necessarily the gameplay experience because, in my opinion, some of the gameplay of that is a little bit clunky. But in terms of just nixing that ability to float above, because it's not about just getting to the end of the level in this, which of course you can do, but it is about staying on the ground, defeating each of the enemies, because each of those enemies might be tied to one of the missions, and really forcing you to pay attention to the environment and the level design.
Yeah, and the other thing is just like, I want to get the Waddle-Dees because I want to expand the town. And I think this is maybe the most important part of the game's kind of reconsidered structure. Yeah. Because as you're playing Kirby games in the past, it's fun. I think about like Robobot. In Robobot, there's these, I forget what they're called. They're like these crystal cubes, and if you get enough of them, you open up an EX stage and more level. They're basically star coins. Yeah. Which is fine, and the collectibles in past games are fine, but there's a real want to get the Waddle-Dees because you want to grow out the village, and I really think that Waddle-Dee Village is maybe the single smartest thing this game does, beyond obviously being put in 3D, which I think is kind of a given. The Kirby games have always had awesome side games, and I think side games are really fun, but they've always been divorced from the gameplay experience. The only time that I think they kind of made sense was in Superstar, when the entire game was this smorgasbord of stuff. But as we move forward, it's like, oh, I'm playing Robobot, cool side games, but you just get them off the menu for completion, percentage completion, whatever. But here, it really feels like there is a forgotten land that Kirby is living in, because this hub is so full of life, and as you get more Waddle-Dees and get new, the gacha machines and the new sub games and everything, I just think that is such a great reason to want to engage with the game further. And this is actually one of my favorite hub areas in any 3D platform.
No, it's great. I love Waddle-Dee Village. I love how it progresses, and I think it is that progression and the contextualization that makes me connect to this world far greater than I ever have with any other Kirby world. The over consistency of this is just a decaying world aside, from a visual perspective, this is the most I've ever enjoyed being in a Kirby world because it is significantly more contextualized. The mini games exist within the world because you saved this Waddle-Dee and he set up this booth, and voila, you can do the fucking tilt and tumble game. Like, great, fantastic. You are sitting in Waddle-Dee Town with the guys walking by while you're doing the fishing. This isn't just Kirby teleports to fishing land and he is doing fishing minigame now. You're fishing in the pond. That's there. And I think that contextualization helps the progression because you want to see what unlocks next. You want to continue engaging with this content because you know there is an external reward that will meaningfully impact your gameplay, which I think is also not only built up by building out Waddle-Dee Town, but by the system of coins and the star crystals. I don't remember exactly what they're called, but those meaningfully impact the progression in the world and your moveset abilities with the upgradable copy abilities, and which then in turn unlock more treasure roads, and then there is a very consistent feedback loop in which no element of collectibles or exploration or engaging with the hub world is left tangential, except for I think the little trophies, which just exist to. They have the 3D models and they can put them on a base. But that element aside, which is just intentionally superfluous, everything is contextualized in a really nice way.
Yeah, the game is really deliberate. I happen to really like the trophies. I think
so do I. I don't have anything against them, but they are certainly an outlier.
They are basically just like kind of another staple of modern Kirby. Here's a fun like little tchotchke collectible that Kirby gets. Yeah. So here's another reason to explore the level a little bit further. And I think these are just way more interesting than the puzzle pieces in Star Allies, which sucked. Yeah. Better than the stickers in Robobot, which were fine. And they're better than the keychains too from Triple Deluxe. It's just because I love like the character designs in this game. There's so many cool new enemies, and I love the new copy abilities. So just having the little trophies, I think it's a cute detail. But I agree with you. The copy ability system is something that as I said in our impressions of the demo, was like, I don't know if it's really going to matter. And in the scope of combat, I don't think they really do, frankly. I was playing on wild mode. Which one were you playing on?
Wild.
Yeah. And so whenever I'd actually reach a boss, I would just drop my copy ability and fight as regular Kirby, because the stars do way more damage. So my thing is, like, in the context of just regular levels, I don't think the upgraded copy abilities matter. But where they do matter for me is in the challenge roads, which I think I don't really like that aesthetic.
The treasure road thing, it's Super Mario Sunshine's floodless levels, teleporting doors in Odyssey. Like, Nintendo's like, hey, we want to have fun designs, and they're focused only on level design and not environmental design. So I can understand why it went that way, but you're right. It's just floating pink shit in a void. Like, it's not that interesting. It's
not that interesting, but I like the idea of making you think about how these copy abilities actually function.
Absolutely.
When the main game doesn't really. So I like that sort of metagame loop of, let's clear the challenge roads to get the stars to upgrade the abilities to do more challenge roads and really understand these power-ups. Because that's just a level of, besides the mouthful modes, which are very deliberate to the level design, it's like there's no opportunity to make outside of very small environmental puzzles, there's no opportunity to make these copy abilities feel really important. So the treasure roads do that, and they're just fucking cool. Like, I love, like, the pencil sharpener ability upgrade for the drill. Like, they're so clever. So I always had fun getting a new one and just seeing how it looked and how it was animated.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. In terms of the environmental design, of the actual straight up levels, you don't need to upgrade your abilities. You can beat these levels without getting the fucking pencil drill. You can beat it without getting the cluttered spike ball. Like, that's not going to be an issue. But I do think that they are contextualized in an interesting way when you're talking about these treasure roads, that yes, the pencil drill is basically the same as the normal drill, but it has a little pencil that shoots out. Okay, how does that interact with a level that is specifically designed for the fact that they know this ability can do this thing that other one cannot? And you can't access that until you've gone and beaten 2 or 3 other treasure roads and got enough coins to upgrade it, and then you can unlock this. Like, there is a feedback that does make them feel meaningful in terms of gameplay in a way that I never have felt like specific copy abilities mattered in previous Kirby games. When you're talking about fire or ice or hammer in the other ones, it's about, do you prefer to be able to move while you're attacking? Do you prefer your enemies to turn into a ball of ice as opposed to catch on fire? They're functionally rather identical outside of small environmental puzzles, where I do think this game does work a lot better in terms of, they know that you need certain copy abilities in order to get to certain missions. You need to have the drill ability. You have to keep the drill ability for a certain chunk of the level in order to dig under a thing to get the Waddle Dee over there. Or you have to freeze this enemy to have the ice block bounce off the wall and hit a button. Like, there is more contextualization of why each of these abilities and their differences are important within the levels if you're engaging with all that side content.
Yeah, I think my only point is I just wish that the execution had been a little bit more interesting, I guess.
Yeah. Kirby goes through Portal and shows up in place that is designed for him to do that. How does this make sense? Who knows?
I think my larger problem is that you're in and out in a minute tops, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah. You're right. I think like a minute 30 is about 45 seconds to a minute 30 is the average.
Yeah. I think about, like, the shrines, which people had a similar issue of, like, the shrines all look the same. And honestly, this is basically just like a pink version of the shrine aesthetic. And I just think if I was there for a little bit more time, if there was a little bit more time to develop the puzzles, then I think I would have been more consistently engaged. Because at a certain point, I was like, the challenge roads, I love the concept, and I think it makes the copy abilities more important. But towards the end of the game, I was like, I'm just going to return to these in the post game. I don't feel like doing them anymore right now.
That's exactly what
I same.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 things to that I agree with you, but there's 2 reasons that I know why they designed it this way. Is the challenge roads and how short they are based very much on your technical skill of using these abilities in a way that the rest of the game does not require. So I think from that regard, I'm glad that they aren't very long. They are time based. They are score based. You need to get good at this in order to whittle down your time, because it's pretty hard to get down to under that goal time, especially in some of the later ones. So from that regard, I'm very glad that they're different. But also, I do think that the way that they unlock in terms of you beat a level and you now have access to this, like, there is a nice feedback loop if you want to vary up your gameplay in terms of long level with all the side content in it. Okay, now you've got 2 minute 30 tops challenge roads to go through. That'll give you some reflex-based gameplay that you can burn through, get a couple star coins, and then return to another larger level. I think that if they had been more homogenous with the other levels, it would have felt kind of like outward padding, especially if they weren't as defined. I'm glad that they are different, even if I don't prefer them over the normal levels. But I still do think that they are a great addition in terms of these are slow gameplay, this is fast gameplay, these are short, these are long. Like, there is a nice variety there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that they are really beneficial to the game, as I was saying. I don't know if, like, I think the other thing is just, like, the Switch doesn't load things as fast as my Series X does.
Sure,
and the reason I bring this up,
the load times in this game are great.
No, they are great, but I just bring it up in a sense of, like, okay, I'm gonna hop in here, I'm gonna do a challenge, and I've played like every Kirby game, so I'm going to beat that part-time in 1 or 2 tries. I'm gonna be out of this in like a minute, and then I'm gonna go bring my Kirby on his warp star like 4 seconds down the map this way, click on the next one, load into it, do that quickly, load out of it. I think either if those had been a little bit bulkier, or if it, I think this is the one point where I wouldn't have cared if it was just here's a like a level select or something.
Maybe you didn't know this, but you press Y, you have your level select. You can select them from that menu, and you instantly start them. Yes.
Oh,
yeah, you just press Y, and then I believe you press X, and it switches it to treasure roads.
I rescind.
I'm just telling you that is an option.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
And you can also do Waddle Dee Town and between worlds and stuff like that, like instant teleportation.
Yeah, I was using that because I was like, at first, like, oh, I really hope I don't have to fucking traverse all the way back across the map to get to Waddle Dee Town. Then I accidentally hit B. Like, can I dash? I'm like, let's go to town. Perfect. I want to talk about the combat a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
If we're talking about copy abilities, I think that the combat there's actually there's like some interesting stuff going on Twitter from the developers being like, we didn't want to put that many enemies in because we didn't want to overwhelm Kirby, which was kind of an interesting thing for them to say. And I guess they were turning builds of the game into Nintendo with not enough enemies, and they're like, you gotta bump that up a little bit.
Sure.
And I think that the final game settles on a really nice balance of enemy density. As I said, the combat has been pared back a little bit to its benefit.
Yeah.
And so I found the combat just totally inoffensive, but satisfying the scope of the actual levels. What I've found to be a lot more engaging are the boss fights. I think the boss fights have never been better in Kirby.
Yeah, I certainly agree.
The thing about them is they're a lot more cinematic, which I appreciate. Now the regular mini bosses, there's about the same number of them as there have been. You've got your Mr. Frosty back, you've got Bonkers back, you've got the big sword gentleman back. He looks a little bit different, but he's the same. They're fine. And then you got the one that looks like a ducklet.
Florina.
Yes. But then you have the actual the proper bosses. And let me tell you, when you get to like the Meta Knight boss or the DDD boss, and that music's going crazy, and the camera actually gets down behind Kirby, and they've got complex attack patterns. Again, they're not very hard, but there's just a level. Again, talking about deepening engagement to the gameplay. I think the boss fights are so much more interesting than they ever have been before.
Absolutely, and I think that is because of the added benefit of having a larger space to fight in. They can use larger attacks and do bigger things that are more cinematically interesting and more interesting from a technical perspective of, you need to remember if they're doing this animation, you need to move in this way. Whereas in the previous Kirby games, you could just find the corner and spam your thing, which you absolutely cannot do in this game because there aren't corners to hide in. God, what's the gorilla guy's name?
Goromondo.
Yeah, Goromondo. If you stand across the map, Goromondo's gonna take a rock and throw it at your fucking face. Like, there is a greater degree of complexity to these bosses, and the fact that they are just so much bigger than you, that makes it. People have been saying this and as a joke, but kind of true. It's like a Dark Souls boss. It's like they're like Elden Ring bosses because you're tiny little fucking Kirby with your little deal, and you're fighting this thing that's 20 times the size of you, that's using attacks that smash half the fucking arena, and it's a really different flavor for Kirby bosses, and I think they're all well designed. I don't think there's a single dud in there. I just wish there were more of them. The fact that there's really only 5 boss battles in the game, 6 maybe, and maybe some at the end of the game that I don't know about. That is where I'm like, damn. But also, I do want to get into this. I think the game is well lengthed. I think there's a good amount of content here, good amount of variety. Where would they have added extra boss battles? I don't know. Maybe maybe that's something that the Treasure Roads could have had, different boss battles, stuff like that. But that's just a small knock because it is great quality, serviceable quantity. I just wish they had gone further with it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's going to be one more boss at the end of that post-game world, which I'm hopefully...
I mean, I watched the true ending. I watched the boss battle. It's just another version of Fecto Phyllis, I believe.
Okay, sure.
Because there's like fucking 6 versions of that goddamn boss.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So the other thing I want to talk about with the bosses, and I mentioned it, is I think that they're balanced a lot better from Kirby's power perspective.
Sure, yeah.
Because when I'm playing, I think about Superstar. Because last year, because I was a fucking dumb kid and couldn't do it when I was like 8 or whatever, I wanted to go back.
I thought you were talking about a dumb kid last year.
No, I wanted to beat the arena, so I beat the arena in Superstar. And the thing about beating the arena in Superstar is that you get the hammer and you just spam the shit out of the hammer. Not only because the bosses are easy to spam, but because the copy abilities just do so much fucking damage to them.
Sure. Yeah.
On wild mode, while the game is not, it forces you to be a little more conscious, but there's so many food pickups and everything that I only died again once, and it was on the final boss.
I do like that you don't heal between levels, though.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like how sometimes in Pokemon games there will be a person who heals you at the end of the cave. But if they don't have that, then you have to think a little more about your health. Like, I was thinking more about how much health I had in this than I ever have in previous games. Enemies do more damage. You are in more situations where you're going to receive damage. But you're right. It's not a hard game, of course.
The other thing is like there's just a lot of food everywhere. So I was like, oh, I'm entering this level with like a third of my health, but I'm pretty sure I can fill this back up basically instantly.
Yeah.
But in the scope of the bosses, dropping the copy ability and fighting as regular Kirby is a really, I think, viable way to play because you can actually do more damage if you suck up a couple of those stars. And so it further forces me to think about the boss's patterns, dodge them, get in close to get those stars, shoot them back at them.
Yeah.
So I can get under those, because a lot of the bosses, like extra Waddle Dees, are predicated on beating under a certain amount of time or without damage or getting between the legs or whatever.
Yeah, or trying different copy abilities.
Right.
Which I do think is a nice balance. But you were saying?
Well, yeah, so I'm going to have to go back and do it with these copy abilities, because I dropped copy abilities for basically all the bosses. But I found that to be just really engaging, that I had to think more, and I'm super excited to do the true arena. Once I go back in and I beat the extra world, I'm going to run through the arena, which I'm excited about. Seems a lot, again, the bosses are better, so it's just going to be a better experience. By the way, Goramondo, one of my favorite Nintendo characters now. I fucking love his design. He basically looks like a Jungle Beat boss, pretty much Donkey Kong Jungle Beat boss, but it's just a design I like. There's something primal about my enjoyment of Goramondo. I wish there had been actual amiibo for this game, because these 3 were re-released for Forgotten Land, but if I could have gotten a big Goramondo amiibo, like Detective Pikachu size, I probably would have killed you. I would have exchanged your life for a Goramondo
that wouldn't
amiibo.
surprise me. Yeah. I'm more of a silly dillo kind of guy, you know what I'm saying?
I was like, who the fuck is this guy when I got to Silladillo? The bosses do get weird, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Like, should we talk about the end of the game?
Sure. Yeah. And then I think we also need to talk about fucking mouthful mode.
We'll talk about mouthful mode. Then I would talk about the music also, because I might have a hot take with the music. Let's just talk about the music now, because I want to talk about it.
Fucking fine.
Why don't
we end with the end of the game?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't think the soundtrack's that good.
Okay.
And I might be in the people are like on Twitter like, damn, the soundtrack's awesome. And I think the soundtrack is awesome, but it's so scant. My problem with it is that the same song is used so many times.
Yes.
When I think about like 3D World, I think about, oh my god, think about all these level themes, right? Yeah. Another way that I think these levels could have felt more distinct is if I didn't find the same like thematic motif or just the same song repeated when I went into these levels. So I just wish if the soundtrack was about twice the length that it is, I think it would have been an excellent soundtrack. For now, I think it's good but repetitive.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. I think there's pros and cons to that. I think the fact that this game does have a very good main theme. I like the main theme quite a bit. You know, it was playing over the reveal trailer. It's very catchy, and it is utilized in fun ways throughout the soundtrack. But you're right, that can lead to it feeling repetitive. There are a number of good songs here that I will add to my memory bank of great Kirby songs. But you're right in terms of lack of variety, because instead of going for different kinds of level motifs and musical motifs throughout the songs. They're like, hey, we've got this great main theme. What if this time it had a little bit of a spin on it that made you feel like you're in the fucking fire world or the water world or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's fun, but it's kind of the problem that I had with Super Mario Sunshine's soundtrack. I love Delfino Plaza. I love all the fucking songs in that game. But when you're hearing that same fucking motif over and over again, the levels do feel like they are less distinct. I think it is kind of that same design philosophy as Super Mario Sunshine. Is like, these worlds and the world that they are on, even if they are different, are way more cohesive than anything we've seen in Kirby before. So maybe they wanted to shift towards that, maybe a little too much in my opinion, but sure. Hey, this is the Forgotten Land theme, and no matter where you are in the Forgotten Land, you're going to hear a version of this theme. So I can see what they were going for, but you're right. Kirby's been great for having a variety of well, to a certain degree. I mean, you're going to hear fucking Greens and Gourmet Race through all the goddamn games. But yeah, pros and cons, but you're right. Wish there'd been more.
Yeah.
Because it is so epic. I mean, it's got an Odyssey or Galaxy style sweeping orchestral score to it, which I think is great. And I would have loved to have heard more songs in that style.
Yeah,
or I could just go listen to the Galaxy soundtrack or the Odyssey soundtrack.
Which are both great.
Yeah.
Mouthful mode?
Why the fuck not, you know?
Mouthful mode is great. Mouthful mode, I think, next to Waddle Dee Town, is the other really important invention of this game.
Yeah.
Because, again, this is what really forces the level design to change.
Yes.
The segments wherein you're doing mouthful mode are different. Some are more passive, like Stairs mouth, which is fucking ridiculous.
It's fucking stupid, but I just love how he stretches his entire body over that. Holy shit.
Yeah. And Stairs mouth, Cone mouth, these things are good, but they obviously affect level design a lot less. It's like, here's the puzzle that you solve with this. But then you think about like Ring mouth, you think about R-Wing mouth, whatever the fucking flying one is. Archmouth. You think about Car mouth, the iconic ones. Like these really do force the levels into a completely different mode of design.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that is just so beneficial to the game flow. Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, it reminds me of, and I know you haven't experienced this, but vehicle segments in something like Sly Cooper or Jack and Daxter this is a segment of this level where you're going to be interacting with it very differently, and it's going to keep the pacing of the levels very varied. And I think to that degree, it's quite a lot like I mean, intentionally so, but quite a lot like the captures in Super Mario Odyssey. Is you're in the section where the ability of this thing is going to be very different, and it's going to completely change how you jump, how your combat works, how you're going to engage with, okay, there's cracks in this level, there's a shape in this level. If I'm this shape, I'm going to fit into that hole. Like, it makes you think about the levels in a different way that other Kirby games haven't really had the chance to, because you're going to be Kirby no matter what in those games. You're going to have Fire Kirby or Ice Kirby, and those aren't going to be very much used in the level design, but I think Mouthful Mode, you're right, is one of the great things about this game, because it does add a ton of variety. My one caveat with it being, unlike Super Mario Odyssey, there's a pretty limited number of Mouthful Mode abilities.
Yes.
And they taper off very quickly. You will have seen them all, except for the fucking Optimus Prime truck, by the end of World 3. And you're never going to see a new one. And I think that's a little bit disappointing, is when you're getting Cone Mouth in World 6, but it's it's not a traffic cone, it's like a speaker. That offers no difference. Like, it's yes, it's not a traffic cone, but you're still fucking Cone Mouth. Like, I wish that there had been more saved for the later half of the game that allowed you to interact with puzzles in a different way that were more thematically relevant to the worlds they were placed in. But instead, you have Ring Mouth once in each world, you have Cone Mouth once in each world. Like, there's going to be the same motif over and over again, which is not bad because all those segments are great. But one of the great things about Super Mario Odyssey is you didn't know when you were going to stumble on a new capture. Whether or not it was something stupid, like you're going to go onto the fucking tree once in the game. There's no once in the game captures in this game, except for the final boss, which is not even real capture on it. Like, I just wish there had been more of them, frankly.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the repetition isn't felt as much in my opinion because unlike the transformations in, say, Yoshi's Island or in Epic Yarn, it's not regular level, halt the level, do the mouthful mode, end the level. And now that
to a certain extent,
right? That does happen sometimes.
Yeah.
But as you get deeper into the
for
game,
Archmouth, 100%.
Right.
And for Carmouth, for the most part.
But sometimes you get into towards later of the game, you're like, oh, I'm gonna go to one of the hidden world, the treasure rooms, and I have to do a race as mouthful mode, and then I get out of mouthful mode, or I'm gonna hop into stairs mode, I'm gonna hop into cone, out of the cone, into the ring, out of the ring. Mm-hmm. So they become more of just like additions to the level flow instead of flow enders.
And those are when it works best, in my opinion.
Yes, but I agree with you. I mean, the idea that Kirby can just stretch himself around anything, I think, opens up the design for more than they give us.
Yes,
absolutely. So I would have liked to see a little bit more there.
And also because there weren't that many surprises. I actually think maybe like fucking Locker's mouth and like weird ball that you have to glom on top of and shake around to pop it off. Like those are kind of the only ones that we didn't see pre-release.
That one was in the demo, even.
Well, I guess it's in like level 1, but also those are the worst ones. Like they're not interesting. They're like the fucking zipper capture in Odyssey. Like you do it to unlock something and not because it's fun to control.
Yeah, I think so. This might have been in the trailers, but I kind of stopped watching the trailers at a certain point so I could be surprised. But water balloon mouth Kirby is my favorite.
That was in the first trailer.
Oh, that was. Oh,
I believe so.
Well, I'd forgotten about it. But I love that. Not
the first trailer, but the first trailer where mouthful mode was.
Yeah, I love that one. I love like big, like water logged, wiggly, wobbly Kirby.
And his jump is so weird when you're in that mode.
Yeah,
it's great. It's great, and he gets a little bit smaller as you do it. Awesome.
That's actually a good segue into one of the last things I want to talk about before we talk about the end of the game. Get the fuck out of here. Is the fidelity of the game.
Yeah.
I think that this is a beautiful game, beautifully animated, great attention to detail. But it is also an example. I think it's one of the clearest examples of why this thing right here. Yeah. My actual Switch is in my backpack somewhere. This fucking rig right here is not powerful enough anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
The reason I say this is because it does the Legends Arceus thing of in the distance things move at 2 frames per second.
Yeah.
And then as you get close to them, they snap into regular FPS, which is only jarring insofar as the game otherwise is absolutely beautiful. It's highly detailed. And I feel like it's easy to become immersed in these worlds for the most part.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking in the background, I'm like, Mr. Kibbles is like throwing his cutter, but I could individually count the frames of that action.
Yeah.
It's a little bit underwhelming because I think the rest of the game is just so amazingly detailed.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly it's the sacrifice that I would take. It's a sacrifice I took for this. It's a sacrifice I took for Legends Arceus. Neither of which bothered me that much, but you're right. Yeah. It stands out specifically in this game as opposed to Legends Arceus, where it was more egregious because this game is technically flawless otherwise. I mean, it is a gorgeous game. It's certainly one of the more detailed games of Kirby. I mean, and the amount of intricacies in the level design and the little different kinds of animations that all the different characters have, including Kirby and the Waddle Dees and such, is next level, and it is fantastic, and it makes these worlds very believable. So I actually don't count that among my negatives because I would rather they have done that to make the rest of the game, like 95% of the game, be technically flawless, and then you like sometimes look in the back and like, that's right, this game does that. But I actually kind of had a fun time thinking about that. Like occasionally I'd be like, I wonder if I just sit here and like look in the background, what are they gonna look like back there? That's gonna be fun. That's gonna be funny to look at for a second. But it doesn't impact the gameplay, obviously.
No, certainly
not. But you're right. From a technical perspective, this game is fantastic. I do think that it is the best example of generic Kirby style being trend because there is no special aesthetic to this game. It is HD Kirby, but in the 3D environments with the amount of environmental detail, it works the best. I do wish there had been sometimes less saturation on things. Like sometimes Kirby will look very blown out, like he's like bright, and the pink is like weirdly saturated. I'm like, he kind of is weirdly standing out of the environment. I wish that they had like gone for a more deliberate color palettes occasionally. But then when you're in Waddle Dee Town, everything has this nice look to it. Like most for like 85% of it, I didn't have that issue. But occasionally I was like, I wish there had been a stronger aesthetic to this because otherwise it is the best looking generic art style Kirby game.
Yeah, that kind of just goes back to my point at the beginning of like, what if we made these motifs a little bit more distinct?
Exactly. Yeah. The one thing I will say about the game's aesthetic that I think is probably its strongest part, and where I wish that they had leaned more heavily into a stronger aesthetic, is the UI and the transitions between levels. When you get that little animation that's like Plant World, and it does the tree pops up, and the beautiful vine flops down, and the circles and the like rectangles are like going everywhere. Very clean, really impressive. I love that a lot, and it made me think like, man, I wish, of course, they can't do this for a 3D Kirby game with that aesthetic because it's like purely 2D. But if they had leaned more heavily into a unique art style and animation style for this game, it would have shown even better than it already does.
Yeah, so that's why, again, I hope like the Robobot equivalent that we get in a couple years for Forgotten Land, I think could be really staggering because I agree. I think the UI design is really excellent.
Yeah.
The last point I have about this is more of a level design thing than an aesthetic thing, but I just remembered it. The game does have far more invisible walls than I would have hoped.
Sure.
Which is just a symptom of the fact that this is. So here's the way I think about it, right? 3D World feels far more artificial than this.
Absolutely.
But as a result, I think its invisible walls are less noticeable because the stage just ends.
Yeah.
You know, this doesn't do that, and I think that there were opportunities where, even if it was superfluous, like in the mall, I wish I could jump over the railing and fall back down. Just because that would have given me a greater sense of place. But when I keep jumping up against invisible walls, I'm like, oh, right, this is a very linear game.
Yes.
And I don't, and I just think because there's
or when you're in like the open water levels and you're like floating along signs like you can't go any farther because the game can't let you go any farther. Like, what are you gonna do out there? But also, it's very obvious that there's a just long invisible wall over the open ocean for no goddamn reason.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the trade-off. I think like I prefer that is out there. I don't want the Captain Toad 3D World thing of just like, and the edges of the world exist and there's just void beyond them.
Yeah.
But I just think that there are moments where it could be more seamless. So I think about the level at the beginning of the desert area that is actually is a little bit more open.
Yeah.
Like you end up in this big just like ovular area that you can walk through a little bit more. And it makes me think like for the next game,
I hope that of ovules.
I hope that for the next game that there are some more of those areas.
Yeah. I do think not the next step for this, because I do think that if we're getting another 3D Kirby game, maybe this is a fucking discussion for another day anyway.
Yeah.
We get another game of this linear style with a stronger gimmick, with a stronger aesthetic. Great. Fantastic addition to this series. But I do think ultimately what we want, quote unquote, is a sunshine for Kirby. Is larger open levels that do feel really organic, that aren't incredibly linear. You can use exploration even further. That's the ultimate dream, though. I mean, this is like 85% of the way to that dream, and because of that, I'm ecstatic, and it's one of my favorite games I've played this year. I mean, recently, all of that. But this is what that's leading to, and that's great.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what we need now is the Kirby Odyssey. We have the Kirby 3D World.
Yeah.
I think is the best shorthand to use there.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the horse shit finale to this game. And I mean that both for better and for worse.
Yeah.
The thing about it is that, and I don't really know why they decided this needed to be the case, but Kirby games just always end with this ridiculous apocalyptic twist.
Yeah.
And I think it's gotten more and more egregious as the games have gone along.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that this one is just fucking crazy. Mm-hmm. Now, the way I think about it is that I actually like the idea of everybody left, and what's left behind are like these animals, and now the animals want to escape the planet or whatever. And
I need to go look at the Kirby lore, because I actually thought that the idea of leading to this and entering the fucking lab and stuff was interesting, lore-wise, story-wise. I mean, but I think the problem is it's so fucking backloaded. It's insane. You go the entire game with no story points. Absolutely no story points. Other than the fact that King DDD is here too, Bandana Waddle Dee is here too. You meet Elfville and you have to fix up Bandana Waddle Dee Town. Okay, but like, there's no mid-boss where you're teased that Leongar is out there, that he's leading the Beast Pack. You have no way of knowing that the Beast Pack is called the Beast Pack, or that they like know each other, that they're working under a boss. It's like, it's the opposite of what they did with the fucking Brutals. Is the Brutals are introduced, you know that these four schmucks are working for Bowser, and you're gonna battle them, but you know what you're leading to is Bowser.
Yeah.
And this, you're like, I fight Goromondo, I fight Chlorine, I fight Silly Dillo, DDD's in there as well for no fucking reason, and then, oh, they have a boss? And this boss is guarding a thing, and where the fuck did this come from? And I like it conceptually. I think that Leongar's boss battle is good. I think the story idea of whatever fucking bullshit Kirby thing, like Dreamland was the better half of this world or whatever, and this is the disposed, left behind bit. All that is cool, but it comes 30 minutes before the end of the game for 9 hours of none of that before.
Yeah, I look over at Martin and I'm like, okay, now it's time for the Kirby horse shit.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand why they keep doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I think Robobot does a much better job of integrating its ridiculous, like anti-colonialist narrative to the entirety of the runtime.
Yeah.
But here it's like, and now you fight DDD, and then, okay, you beat DDD, and now you're in a fucking elevator, and now we're gonna just dump exposition on you for 3 minutes, and then you're just gonna, then you're going to go to the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then the game is going to be over.
Yeah. Which
is like, I don't understand why they do it, but there is some kind of just like bizarre charm in saying fuck it, let's fight a guy that looks like he's out of Metroid Fusion, and then we're gonna go do the Sin and Punishment boss battle, and then we're gonna do the Sephiroth fight, and the game's gonna be over as he plays Optimus Prime.
Yeah.
So
I think pretty much categorically, I liked the end in a stupid way. I like that this. It does feel like a ramp up at the end. It's like, holy shit, the world's fucking going crazy. Whoa! Like, it's a fun way to cap off an adventure. But I think my only problem with it is that it's not led up to at all. The fact that it comes out of nowhere is the only issue with it. If it had been teased, if Leongar had been teased, if we had known that Elfilin was a part of this larger force earlier, then that would have been a reasonably interesting twist. But it's not a twist. It just turned into a different game and a different story at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Not related to what you've been doing the other time, except for the fact that Elfilin is a character that is not that interesting. He doesn't really do anything. Very weak integration of this character into the story. And that the waddle-dees have been captured to fucking run on mousy wheels. Like those are the only things that tie the two sections together. But on the whole, I thought the back to Elfilin's fight was great. I liked the part where you're Crash Bandicoot style being chased down the fucking hallway. I liked the Leongar fight is actually pretty great. Everything there and the fucking Optimus Prime thing is just insane, but it's fun visually. I don't know if it's very fun gameplay wise because it's kind of just a cutscene. But I like all of that. I just wish it had been led up to better.
Yeah, it's like, have you seen that viral video of the guy who jumps the Tesla? Basically what it is it's this guy who's in a Tesla and he's going up a hill that's literally built like this in California. Yeah. So he goes up it, then all of a sudden it's so steep that the car goes like this and then lands on its nose like halfway down the side of the hill. And that's the plot structure of Kirby. Sure. It's just like road that ramps up but you don't know where it's going to, and then you reach the point of inflection and you're just fucking flying out. Yeah. And I've come to expect it. I just think that we could do better.
I've absolutely come to expect it because
cool.
Tanner walked in just as I had met Leongar. And I'm like, I know what's going to happen here. This guy is the big boss, but he's not the actual big boss because he's being controlled by some godlike force behind him that I'm going to fight that's going to turn into this crazy thing that'll inevitably turn into an orb that has some relation to Kirby's backstory, and the space-time continuum is in fucking flux, and then the game's going to end and Kirby's going to go eat a goddamn piece of cake. Every Kirby game ends like this. And it's kind of fun to be able to know that, but also you're right. It's a tired trope at this point.
The last thing I think we ought to talk about is just the scope of the game, the runtime, things of that nature. And then we can
skedaddle.
Well, I think the game was the right length. I again, as I said, going into the review, I was concerned the game would be too short. In actuality, I think the main campaign is the right length, and I think that there's a lot to do. I finished with 61% completion.
I was brilliant too,
Yeah, so I actually have quite a lot to go back in and do the side games and do all of that. I will say that there is one. This is like a really niche thing that I want.
Okay.
But one of the really fun parts of past Kirby games post game was redoing the stages or redoing versions of the stages as different characters. So like in Superstar, you can replay the game as Meta Knight, and it's sort of like a truncated version of Superstar. But it's fun to revisit those levels with a different character. Yeah. And DDD and like Star Allies, I think for as middling as Star Allies was, it was fun to replay the game with Chef Kawasaki or King DDD or
the Star
whoever.
Friends are the greatest part of that game.
Absolutely. And then so I beat the game and I see King DDD lounging on a bench. I'm like, oh my god, I get to go talk to him, because if people don't know, I don't even know if you know this, but King DDD is my favorite Nintendo character.
Yeah.
So I was super excited to go talk to him on the bench, and then he'll become a playable character, and I can go back and clean up these last objectives I need as King DDD.
Yeah.
That's not the case. Kirby is the only playable character, or co-op Bandana Waddle Dee if you want to do that. But I wish there had been more playable characters, because I think that would have given even more replay value.
Absolutely. But I can smell that coming as DLC, honestly. Like, when they add another world and they add a better co-op mode, like, I feel like this game is going to have a better but similar track record to Star Allies, is that we're going to get expansions and little challenges, and I pretty much, I really much hope that they add extra playable characters. I don't think it'll certainly not be as extensive as what Star Allies did, but at least Waddle Dee or fucking Meta Knight and DDD, I think will come. You're right that it is weird, but also I've never spent time playing this other characters in Kirby games, so it's like nothing that I thought about at all. I do think that what I have seen from the post-game content of this game is fantastic. There is a whole... Do you know about the... Did you go up the tower, talk to Clara, and get...
Yeah, I talked to her. I looked through. I'm like, ooh, it looks like a whole other world. Then I was like, ooh, it's literally 2 a.m. I need to go to bed.
Sure.
So I haven't gotten to do it yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully tonight.
I played most of the first level. And what this game does is kind of what you were talking about with how the worlds were thematically similar, or the levels were thematically similar, is it stitches a section from each level together.
Ooh, awesome.
Makes them harder with harder enemy placement, and changes up the collectibles within the level. So you're collecting pieces of Leongar's soul for whatever fucking reason. I don't know. But so it's like each level is like a 45-minute deal that is chunks together of every level from each world, and you have to engage with them differently because of level placement and the like level things that do damage to you. What's the fucking obstacles? Level obstacles and stuff.
Yeah.
Are much harder. So I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I mean, that basically sounds like Meta Nightmare, but you don't play as Meta Knight.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. I'll be excited to do that tonight. But
God damn. I'm so happy with this game. I really do think it's up there for me. As I said, I do think, and I think I've presented very well why I do think that this game's design philosophy in terms of gameplay loop and progression are leagues above previous Kirby games, and I'm very happy that HAL has taken this step to take ideas from other franchises. This is the closest that we've seen to Kirby be to the structure of other games, and I think that's for the better, because Kirby's concepts and world and charm are so great that putting it over what has been more of a tried and true level structure and mission structure and collectible structure, it greatly increases my enjoyment of this series, of this world. And easily my favorite Kirby game, one of my favorite 3D platformers, one of my favorite Switch games, probably be up there when we finish this year of one of my favorite games of the year. I'm so fucking happy with this game, and it's just another check on the list of entries in franchises on the Switch that are just like either the best or top considered of each of their franchises. I mean, there's a retrospective to be had at the fucking end of year 9 or whatever the fucking Switch life cycle ends about how it has impacted each of its series, and I'm so glad Kirby finally got that fucking reinvention that it has needed for so badly for so many years.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just as happy too. Kirby's always been one of my favorite series, and I think that this is objectively in the top 3 for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I would give, again, I would personally, I'd give it my number 2 spot. From a more objective standpoint, I think I'll be curious to see if there's more DLC, if there's more support. I think it could take that number 1 spot, but I think what's more likely is whatever comes after it could take that number 1 spot.
Sure. Oh, that's a great point. Well, of course. I don't deny that, but I also do want to say that there's no way in shit this is not the best-selling Kirby game of all time.
It's already doing great numbers.
A month and a half. Because I've just learned this in the last few days. Kirby does not sell well. There are so many fucking Kirby games, but the highest selling game ever is the first one with 5 million.
Yeah.
Most Kirby games have sold less than ARMS did. Why are there not 40 ARMS games? Why are there fucking 40 Kirby games? It's very strange, but I'm glad that Kirby is taking this turn to be more appealing to a wide stream audience. Yeah. I do think that this is going to be a turning point in the franchise.
I agree with you. I think that it is challenging for me to see a Nintendo game that comes out to see that I'm going to like more than this.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Even with Splatoon 3, even with these things, without Breath of the Wild 2, as I said when we made that video, I remember editing that when I was at Thanksgiving with my uncle. So I've been right about that for a long time, by the way. But for me personally, I don't think I've seen a Nintendo game topping this year. So very, very happy. This is probably, I'm actually going to, at some point this weekend, just for my own enjoyment, put together my top 10 Switch games. Because people have been doing that in like their Switch groups or whatever. I figured I'd do that and make a screenshot or something. But this is certainly in my top 10. I don't know if it cracks the top 5, but it's very close.
We'll see. We'll see what you think about it. And then when you change your mind 30 minutes later, but don't change the grouping.
You're completely correct.
Yep. We'll talk to you guys in another video. Go play this goddamn game. All right, your titties calm? Let me see those titties.
Nope.
You know it's going to be a good Kirby review when you start rubbing our goddamn titties.